After a devastating storm, Elias heard a sound. A dying bobcat kitten, no bigger than his hand, was clinging to life. He saved the bobcat, raised it, and released it back to the forest. Years later, another storm would put Elias's own life on the line. He was alone, injured, and dying in a freezing creek. He had no idea that his one act of kindness was about to be returned in a way no one could ever believe. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Elias Thorne was a man carved from the very woods he called home. At 73, his face was a roadmap of a life lived outdoors, etched with the sun and wind of the Oregon high desert. His hands, though gnarled with arthritis, were still strong. The hands of a man who had built his own cabin, mended his own fences, and buried his own wife. It was the silence that plagued him most. Clara, his wife of 48 years, had been gone for 3. She had been the voice and laughter of their small homestead, the one who named the jays at the feeder and insisted they leave out scraps for the foxes. Elias, a retired wildlife biologist, had always been the pragmatist, the one who spoke of territories and carrying capacity. "Don't domesticate them, Clara," he'd say gently. "It's a kindness to let them be wild." "There's kindness, and then there's kindness, Eli," she would retort, her eyes twinkling as she tossed a crust of bread onto the porch railing. Now her voice was just an echo in the vast, quiet cabin. He spent his days in a quiet routine, checking his property line, monitoring the creek that cut through the lower pasture, and reading the same field guides he'd read 100 times. The wilderness was his companion, but it was a harsh and unsentimental one. That May, the storms came with a vengeance. For 3 days, a late spring tempest lashed the mountains. Rain fell in horizontal sheets, and the wind howled like a grieving wolf. The creek, normally a placid ribbon of clear water, swelled into a churning, muddy torrent that ripped at its banks. When the storm finally broke on the 4th morning, the world was scoured clean and broken. Elias pulled on his worn boots, his hip aching in the damp cold, and went out to survey the damage. A great ponderosa pine had fallen, its massive root ball ripped from the earth. Downed branches littered the ground. As he neared the edge of his property, where the woods thickened into national forest, he heard a sound. It was not the chirp of a bird or the chatter of a squirrel. It was a thin, desperate cry, almost too high for the human ear. He stopped, listening. The sound was weak, intermittent. He followed it to a tangle of boulders and roots where a large madrone tree had been partially uprooted. The storm had caused a small mudslide, tearing apart the earth. There, in a hollow that must have been a den, he saw it. Grief struck him first. 2 small, tawny bodies lay still, already cold and stiff, half buried in the wet earth. The mother was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she'd been out hunting when the slide hit, or perhaps she, too, was buried somewhere beneath the muck. Then, from under a clump of roots, the sound came again. Elias knelt, his bad hip screaming in protest. He carefully moved a piece of broken wood and saw a 3rd kitten. It was alive, but only just. It was no bigger than his hand, its fur matted with mud, its eyes barely slitted open. It shivered violently, a tiny, fragile thing against the immense, brutal backdrop of the storm's aftermath. The biologist in him, the man who lived by the rules of the wild, spoke first. "Leave it. The mother will not return. It's the harsh math of nature. It's too weak. You'll only prolong its suffering. He stood up, his heart a cold knot in his chest. He was supposed to let nature take its course. He turned to walk away. There's kindness, and then there's kindness, Eli. Clara's voice was so clear in his mind, it was as if she were standing right beside him. He stopped. He looked back at the shivering creature, its mouth opening and closing in a silent, desperate plea. "Damn it, Clara," he whispered, his voice thick. He went back, shrugging off his heavy flannel overshirt. With a gentleness that belied his calloused hands, he scooped up the tiny creature. It was lighter than a whisper, its bones like tiny twigs. It let out one more feeble cry, a sound that pierced Elias's carefully constructed solitude. He wrapped it in the warm, dry flannel, tucking the bundle inside his jacket, close to the warmth of his chest. "All right, little one," he murmured, his breath pluming in the cold air. "I guess we're in this together. But I'm making no promises." The first 48 hours were a desperate waking dream. He called Sarah, the veterinarian in the small town 20 miles down the mountain. She was a no-nonsense woman half his age. "You know the protocols, Eli," she said over the phone, her voice weary. "The rehab center in Bend is full up, and honestly, a kitten that young without a mother, its chances are next to nil." "I know, Sarah. Just what formula?" She sighed. "Kitten milk replacer, but for a bobcat, you need to supplement. I have some, and you'll need a miracle." He drove to town in his old truck, the tiny flannel-wrapped bundle on the passenger seat. He got the supplies and an eyedropper. For 2 days and 2 nights, Elias sat in his armchair by the wood stove, the kitten, which he'd begun to call Rusty for its reddish spotted fur, resting on a heating pad in a cardboard box. Every 2 hours, he would gently pry open the tiny mouth and squeeze in a few precious drops of formula. He would rub its belly with a warm, damp cloth, simulating a mother's tongue, a grim task he knew was necessary for the kitten to survive. He didn't sleep. He just watched the tiny chest rise and fall, expecting it to stop at any moment. On the 3rd morning, he must have dozed off. He woke with a start, the cabin cold. His first feeling was a cold dread. He looked into the box. The kitten was staring at him. Its eyes, a cloudy electric blue that would later turn a piercing yellow, were wide open. And it was hungry. It let out a surprisingly robust mewl, a sound that was half hiss, half cry. Elias felt something shift inside him, a rusty hinge swinging open. He prepared the formula, his hands shaking slightly. The kitten no longer needed the dropper. It latched onto the nipple of a tiny bottle, suckling with a desperate, life-affirming strength. Elias Thorne, the man of science and solitude, sat back in his chair and laughed. It was the first time he had laughed, really laughed, since Clara's funeral. The rules of wildlife rehabilitation were clear. You raise them to be wild. Minimal human contact, no names, no treating them like pets. Elias tried. He truly did. He named him Rusty only in his head, but it slipped out one afternoon when the fast-growing kitten, now the size of a small house cat, pounced on his bootlace with all the ferocity of a seasoned predator. "Get off it, Rusty," he'd barked, and the name stuck. He built a large chain-link enclosure behind the cabin, reinforcing it with thick timbers and digging the wire 2 feet into the ground. It wasn't a cage, it was a habitat. He filled it with logs, boulders, and a small den box. He was a biologist, after all. He knew what he was doing. But he was also a lonely old man. He knew Rusty could never be a pet. The cat's wildness was a bright, burning fire. As Rusty grew, his house-cat-like appearance gave way to the unmistakable features of a bobcat. His legs grew long and powerful, his paws disproportionately large. His ears shot up, topped with the distinctive black tufts. His short, bobbed tail was a constant twitching indicator of his mood. Elias minimized contact, but he did not eliminate it. He would sit on a stump just outside the enclosure every evening, reading a book aloud. Rusty would sit on his log, those intense, golden yellow eyes tracking Elias's every move. The cat would listen, not with the domesticated affection of a tabby, but with a sharp, intelligent curiosity. When Rusty was 4 months old, Elias began teaching him to hunt. This was the most critical part. He started with live mice in a controlled part of the enclosure. At first, Rusty was clumsy, batting at them playfully. "No, son," Elias would say, frustrated. "Not a toy. It's food." He felt a pang of guilt, but he knew this was the ultimate kindness. A bobcat that couldn't hunt was a dead bobcat. He sourced rabbit carcasses from a friend, hiding them, making Rusty use his nose. He built a lure, a piece of fur on a long fishing pole, and would drag it through the tall grass, training Rusty's eyes to catch the movement, to stalk, to pounce with the explosive, lethal precision of his species. One evening, a real wild rabbit squeezed under a gap in the fence Elias hadn't seen. Rusty, now 8 months old and a sleek 15 pounds of muscle, was on it in a flash. The hunt was silent, swift, and brutal. Elias watched, his heart a mix of pride and sorrow. His boy was learning. Sarah the vet came by to give Rusty his final vaccinations. She watched the bobcat, now nearly full grown, tear into a piece of deer meat Elias had provided. "You've done an amazing job, Eli," she said, leaning against the fence. "He's magnificent and completely wild." "He is," Elias agreed, his voice quiet. "Which means it's time," she said gently. Elias nodded. He knew. He'd known for months. Rusty had begun pacing the enclosure, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. The call of his true home was growing stronger. "You're getting attached, Eli," she'd warned him weeks ago. "I'm not," he'd lied. The bond was not one of master and pet. It was deeper, stranger. It was a bond of mutual respect. When Elias entered the enclosure to clean it, Rusty would watch him, sometimes approaching to chuff at him. A soft, breathy sound that was the closest a bobcat came to a purr of greeting. But he never tried to cuddle. If Elias reached out a hand, the cat would hiss, a sharp warning that he was not, and never would be, tame. But he never used his claws. It was a complex, silent understanding. The day of the release, Elias woke before dawn. The silence in the cabin felt different. It felt final. He coaxed Rusty into a large transport crate with a piece of venison. The drive was long, nearly 2 hours, deep into the protected wilderness of the Cascade Range, miles from any human settlement. He chose a spot near a running creek, a rocky, wooded area perfect for a bobcat. He parked the truck, his heart feeling like a stone in his chest. This was the right thing to do. This was the true kindness. He carried the crate to a clearing. He knelt and opened the door. Rusty didn't bolt. He walked out slowly, his paws sinking into the soft pine needles. He stretched, a long, fluid motion. He was a breathtaking creature, a 25-pound ghost of the forest, his spotted coat perfect camouflage. He looked at the trees. He looked at the creek. Then he turned and looked at Elias. He just looked. For a long, silent minute, the man and the bobcat stared at each other. Elias saw no gratitude, no sadness. He saw only the wild, but he also saw recognition. He saw the kitten he had held in his hands. "Go on, son," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. "This is where you belong. Be wild, be free, and be smart." Rusty chuffed, just once. A soft puff of air, then, in a single silent bound, he was gone. He didn't vanish. He simply melted into the forest, becoming one with the shadows and the sunlight. Elias stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of the wind in the pines. He got back in his truck. The drive home was the loneliest he had ever known. The silence in the cabin that night was unbearable. 4 years passed. Elias aged. His 73rd winter gave way to his 77th. The ache in his hip was a constant companion, and he walked with a slight limp. He still patrolled his property, but his walks were shorter, his steps more careful. He rarely thought of Rusty, or rather, he tried not to. Sometimes in the winter snow, he would see tracks. Bobcat tracks, larger than a female's. He'd tell himself it was just one of the many bobcats that called the area home, but his heart would quicken. Once, he'd found the remains of a deer carcass by the creek, a clear bobcat kill. He'd nodded, satisfied. Good, he's smart. He never saw the cat, not so much as a flash of fur. The wild had reclaimed its own, as it should. Elias made his peace with it. Then came the autumn of his 77th year. It was a wet, nasty October. The storms were back, not with the fury of that spring storm years ago, but with a persistent, cold, soaking rain that went on for days. The creek, the same creek that had brought him his small, dying friend, was high and angry again. Elias knew he shouldn't be out. The rain had turned the ground to a slick, treacherous mud. But he was a man of routine, and one of his fences near the creek bank looked loose. "Just take me a minute," he muttered to himself, grabbing a post hammer. He made his way down the slippery embankment. The creek was a churning brown soup, carrying debris and small branches. He was 10 feet from the loose post when his bad hip, the one that always ached, chose that moment to give way. It wasn't a dramatic fall. It was a simple, sickening slip. His boot lost its purchase in the mud. He went down hard. He tried to catch himself, but his hands found only slick clay. He tumbled down the last few feet of the bank, and his head struck something with a sickening, hollow thwack. He felt a flash of white-hot pain, and then a terrifying icy cold as the creek water enveloped him. He was in the water. The current, deceptively powerful, grabbed him instantly, pulling him from the bank. He sputtered, muddy water filling his mouth. He was disoriented. The world was spinning. He could feel a warm wetness mixing with the cold water on his face. Blood. He'd cut his head. He tried to kick, to swim, but his right leg was useless. The pain was sharp, electric. He must have broken it in the fall. He was going to die. The realization was calm, absolute. He was 77, alone, injured, and in a flooding creek. He was going to be swept away, and no one would find him for days. He thought of Clara. "I'm coming, honey." He was losing consciousness, the world graying at the edges. The cold was seeping into his bones. He was so tired. He let his head fall back, his body turning in the current. That's when he saw it. On the bank, standing in the driving rain, was a shape. Low, tawny, and utterly still. A bobcat. For a delirious second, Elias thought he was hallucinating, that his dying brain was conjuring a final comforting image. Then the bobcat moved. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a very large, very real bobcat. It leaped down the bank and, without hesitation, plunged into the churning, muddy water. Bobcats can swim, but they despise it. They avoid it at all costs. But this one swam with a powerful, desperate purpose, its head held high. It was coming right for him. Elias's last conscious thought was a flare of primal terror, an apex predator. He was injured, bleeding. The bobcat reached him. He flinched, waiting for the claws, the teeth. Instead, he felt a solid, fur-covered body press against his side. He felt a headbutt hard against his shoulder, pushing him, turning him. He was so confused. The bobcat was helping him. It was positioning itself between him and the main current, its own body taking the brunt of the water's force. It was chuffing, a low, desperate, guttural sound. Elias's fading vision focused. He saw the cat's face, inches from his own, the intense golden yellow eyes, and on its muzzle, a faint white scar, one he'd forgotten about. One Rusty had gotten from a tangle with the enclosure fence years ago. "Rusty," he breathed. It was impossible. The bobcat nudged him again, harder. The animal's strength was incredible. It was pushing him, guiding him out of the main channel and toward a small, submerged sandbar near the bank. Elias, working on pure, dying instinct, reached out. His fingers brushed a thick, exposed tree root. He grabbed it. He held on with the last of his strength. He was out of the main current, but he was still in the freezing water. He was fading fast. He looked at the bobcat. It was in the water with him, its paws on the sandbar, its body pressed against his, as if trying to share its warmth. It was the exact scene from a fever dream, the one captured in a moment of impossible reality. The injured old man, his face bloody, lying in the muddy torrent, guarded by a wild creature of the forest. Rusty, he thought. My boy. Then the darkness took him. He woke to a different sound, a human voice. Elias. Oh my God, Elias, hang on. It was Sarah. He blinked, the rain on his face. He was still in the water, still clinging to the root. But he was alone. Rusty was gone. It was a dream, he thought. A hallucination. Elias, can you hear me? Sarah was at the top of the bank, her face pale with terror. She was on her phone, shouting, "Yes, 911. I found him. He's in the creek. He's alive." Sarah, he slurred. Don't talk, Eli. Help is coming. The cat, he whispered. What? The cat. I thought. Eli, you're in shock, she said, starting to pick her way down the bank. And then she froze. From the woods, a sound emerged. A low, menacing growl. Rusty stepped out from behind a curtain of ferns. He was soaking wet, his fur slicked to his body, and he was staring at Sarah. He let out a hiss that sounded like a saw tearing through wood. He was placing himself between Sarah and Elias. Sarah's jaw dropped. My word. It's okay, Elias managed, his voice a thread. He's a friend. He saved me. Sarah, the woman of science, could only stare. The bobcat was guarding him. It wouldn't let her get closer. It stayed right there, a wild sentinel, until the flashing lights of the ambulance and the sheriff's car appeared on the road. Only then, as the paramedics clattered down the bank with a stretcher, did the bobcat retreat. He didn't flee. He just backed up, step by step, and melted into the woods. Elias woke up in a hospital bed. He had a severe concussion, 12 stitches above his eye, and a cleanly broken tibia. He also had hypothermia. "Another 20 minutes in that water and you'd be gone, Elias," the doctor told him. "You are one lucky, lucky man." Sarah was there when he woke up. She was holding a cup of coffee, but she hadn't touched it. "He stayed, Eli," she said, her voice full of a strange awe. "The sheriff. He saw him. That bobcat sat on the ridge and watched until they had you in the ambulance. Then he was just gone." "I told you," Elias whispered, his throat raw. "He's a smart boy." "You raised him to be wild, Eli," she said, shaking her head. "But you didn't. You didn't raise the wild out of him. You just gave him something else, a connection. I've never seen anything like it." Elias smiled. "Kindness, Sarah. Just kindness." He recovered. It was slow. The leg took months to heal, and his 78th birthday was a quiet one. He walked with a cane now, his days of checking distant fence lines over. But he was alive. It was spring again. 5 years to the month since he had first found that half-dead kitten. Elias was sitting on his porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the jays at the feeder. The world was green and new. He heard no sound. He just felt a presence. He looked up. At the edge of the woods, perhaps 50 yards away, a figure was watching him. It was Rusty. Sleek, powerful, and in his prime. He was the very picture of the wild. Elias's heart ached with a profound, quiet joy. He lifted a hand, the one that had fed the tiny kitten. "Hello, son," he said, his voice carrying on the clear air. The bobcat just watched him, those unblinking yellow eyes a bridge between two worlds. Then, a smaller, spotted head poked out from behind Rusty's leg. And another. 2 kittens, fuzzy and curious, stared at the cabin. Rusty chuffed. It was loud this time, unmistakable. He had brought his new family to show the old man. He was telling him that he was okay, that he was thriving, that the kindness had been passed on. Elias Thorne, a man who had been carved from the woods, felt the silence of his cabin fill, not with the echo of grief, but with the warmth of a bond that nature itself could not explain and would never, ever break. He raised his hand in a final, grateful salute, and the wild family of the forest turned and disappeared back into the trees.